always forget what I say. You know,
It's not to be the same every time.
You're absolutely correct.
Spice it up, yeah.
Yeah.
Now the pressure's on. I gotta be creative. Hey everybody, I'm Mackenzie, Meaney.
And I'm Bridget Reilly.
And today we are joined by our women's basketball expert, Jonathan Kinane, to talk about the women's basketball team. They're at their midseason point. They're currently 10-2 after their recent win against Niagara, which they won 67-45.
Thanks for coming, Jonathan.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. And I think expert might be a little too kind of a word, Mackenzie, but you know.
No, you are fully the women's basketball expert.
You're making me blush already. We're not even a minute in yet.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming. It's been a great time seeing you cover the women for Center Field, and we're really happy to have you on the show today. So most recently, I guess we'll just jump in with a little recap. The women are currently sitting at 10-2, mostly recently winning over Niagara, like Makenzie said, 67-45. Their only two losses came from Quinnipiac and Fairfield. They lost to Quinnipiac in overtime in the second game on January 4th, breaking a 17-game overall winning streak, a 15-game MAC winning streak. First loss since January 30th, 2020 at Fairfield. I know Jonathan was a little upset. It was almost a year, but didn't quite make it, but pretty good. And then they had one loss to Fairfield, who was number one, but went back to the number one spot after Marist lost the second game against them. 6-0 after Quinnipiac would have been their best start yet, but we're still looking good.
So yeah, like you were saying, Bridget, their two losses, both very close games, and you know they went through that. Coach George has called it the gauntlet of Fairfield, Manhattan, Quinnipiac, not in that order, but the three best teams in the MAC, not including Marist. And you know, at the start of the season, if you had said Marist was going to get through 4-2, I think pretty much everyone would have said, yeah, we'll take that and go to the bank with it. But you know, those two losses, both those games, they should have won. The Quinnipiac one, they had a lead late. They let Quinnipiac get a buzzer beater in regulation that sent it to overtime, and they didn't really execute in the overtime. And then Fairfield, they were up 15 at one point, and they just kind of went south from there. So they really should be undefeated, but we do need to put things in perspective and say 10-2 is a heck of a start for such a young team.
Yeah, for sure. Especially after their success last year, they're looking very, very good in comparison to probably all of our thoughts in the preseason poll. Yeah. But good thoughts on that, Jonathan. I definitely wanted to bring up close games with you because I think that, you know, that's where our two losses came from. And also that's a big thing on any team. You need to be able to, you know, have good end game, be able to close it out when you have the points up. So that's really important. Like we said, it happened in Quinnipiac and also with Fairfield. And I noticed in your quotes with Georges, he did mention that they need to work on their end game situations and they need to trust their young players more because they really do have a lot of young talent this year. Kind of not having legs at the end of the game and kind of losing stuff starting in the second half and trying to force things that weren't there. So I was wondering what you think the women need to do better in that kind of realm. Do you have any sort of, any sort of end game advice that you think would work best for them?
Oh yeah, that's a great point. You know, and like you said, having the young team is very important there because last year they didn't play many close games. I can only think of a couple. But when you did get into those end of game situations, you had players like Rebecca Hannon, Grace Vanderweide, who were both very solid foul shooters. Then you also had Alana Gilmer, who wasn't as good from the line, but she could get you scoring whenever you needed it. And this year, you know, you don't really have that many options. You have Willow Duffel, who's really established herself as the go-to player. You know, she came up big in one of those games against Manhattan, and then Niagara. That first game against Niagara, she had 27, and she had 23 of those, I think, in the second half in overtime, which is huge. But the main thing that they haven't done in these close games is they can't make their foul shots down the stretch. They missed chances to put some of these teams away. And if you look at their statistics, Duffel is really I think she's the only one who's taken a lot of, over like 20 shots from the line. And she's the only one over 80%. Everyone else is kind of in like that 60-70% category, which is far from reliable, in these close game situations.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely crucial at the end of games. And you are right, Willow Duffel and actually Kendall Crick are only in the 80% compared to the rest of the team. Definitely Willow having more shots there over her. But yeah, that's definitely going to come down to it in the end. I mean, we even kind of saw it with Niagara this weekend, playing down to another team's level. Like, that's bound to happen. Turnovers last season, they had about 13.7 per game. Assist turnover ratio was 1.5, and then points off the turnovers was 15.8. And then this season they have about 13 turnovers per game, but they have points of turnovers to be 16.7. So it's a bit more than usual.
Yes, and I do have to mention right there, because she always falls through the cracks here, but Allie Best, there are not many more point guards than Allie Best, I guess, and who you would want having the ball late game. I mean, she missed a couple foul shots against Niagara in the first game, but she takes care of the ball. She's gonna step up. She's stepped up in some games, and I just feel like she always, she doesn't play a very glamorous game. She's not always scoring. She's not making fantastic behind the back dribbles or whatever. But she takes care of the ball. She gets the job done. I just wanted to shout out Allie Best, because a lot of times she goes under the radar. Sorry to interrupt.
No reason to be sorry. She's actually my favorite because I love like a good unsung hero. And I love how she's like not fancy with it. Like, I appreciate that. Like, I kind of like fangirl over her because I love how she has like the most assists. Like, I love assists over points. Like, that's one of my favorite things about a player. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned her because she's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was big in that play against Manhattan at the end of the game when the refs blew the inverted whistle. She was the one on the floor trying to get the ball.
Yes.
And luckily, obviously, it went in Marist's way, and they ended up winning. She shows up big in ways that aren't always on the score sheet.
Exactly.
Yeah, she's a hustler, for sure.
So, Jonathan, in the women's roundtable that we did at the beginning of the season, you mentioned that their biggest weakness was going to be scoring from the outside. Right now, for their three-point percentage, they are .336. And last season, they were .365. So per game, they're shooting about 6. And last season, they're shooting about 7.7. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the round table at the start of the season makes me sound a lot smarter than I really am, but it is a weakness for them. I think in terms of their offensive strategy, I think that's the biggest hole they have probably, and that's kind of just because the lineup isn't really built around 3-point shooting, especially since Sarah Barcelo's been out for the last 5 games, and she's probably their best shooter, or at least their highest volume shooter. I mean, you have Allie Best, she's made a lot of big threes. I think she's somewhere around 40% this season. And then after that, it kind of just drops off in terms of who's going to take those shots. Trinasia Kennedy has proved herself kind of a streaky shooter. The game where she went off for like 26 points, she made some threes, but it's just kind of been inconsistent. And then Barcelo and Crick isn't much of a last year the team could spread the floor, and all of the players, all the starting lineup was at leist capable of hitting those shots. So this year that's not really the case, and they're playing a different style of basketball. They're getting it inside more to Weimer, to Duffel. They're driving to the hoop. So
yeah, for sure. Shooting threes is obviously going to help them get more points, help them win, and like we've been talking about, maybe even get them out of those close games at the end of that, like down in the stretch of the last 5-10 minutes of the game.
Speaking of players, Jonathan, and kind of having to readjust the team this year, who were you most surprised by, and who are you hoping to see step up a bit more in the second half of the season?
Ooh, that's a good question. you know, who are you most surprised by? I mean, there's a couple answers. I mean, Caitlin Weimer was maybe the highest ranked recruit Marist has ever landed. So, you know, is that fair to say you're surprised she's averaging, you know, 10 points and almost as many rebounds per game? I don't know. You know, she's been really good. That's a great question. But the person I'd say I'm most surprised by, I think it might be Allie Best. She's just done such a great job at point guard. You know, she's really been a steadying force for this team, and I know that she's always proven she can take care of the ball, but over the last few games, she's really started to hunt her shot more, and that's kind of been a good thing for Marist now that they're being able to you know, score the ball with her. She's not just a passer, which makes them harder to defend. So I don't know, but I guess I'll go with Best there, Bridget. I don't know. I'll add one more if I can give a two-part answer. Zaria DeMember-Shazer, she's one of the freshmen, and I wasn't sure how exactly she was going to fit in at the start of the season, but she's established herself as one of the first, if not the first player off the bench most games, and she brings a lot of energy, good rebounder, can step out and hit a shot. So she had a really solid start to the season. Now she's kind of leveled off a little bit, but we'll see if she can get her level of play back up to what it was like, you know, in the first few games.
But who are you also waiting to see step up more in the second half, Jonathan?
I think the answer isn't a player, it's a group. I'm going to say the bench. You know, I think the bench, because the players coming off the bench, you know, DeMember-Shazer, Emma Wax, Annabelle Ellison, Sam Bailey, they all have potential, and we've seen all of them flash that potential. But they're all young. They're all, you know, freshmen or sophomores. So can they kind of become a more consistent force? You know, so can the bench step up and really make this a, you know, 8 or 9 deep team? And, you know, the more options you have, the more dangerous you're going to be, and the more depth you have, the better you can, you know, weather these back-to-back games, and then potentially like 3 in a row in the MAC tournament if we get there.
Okay, Jonathan. So now we're looking at the second half of the season. We're halfway through. If things go as planned, they're next going to be set up against Ryder, January 29th and 30th, and then Iona they see like a Wednesday apart, and they last played Niagara January 2nd due to MAC scheduling changes, so they haven't played for a while there. And Monmouth is February 6th and 7th, Iona again February 10th, and then St. Peter's following on February 20th and 21st, and then finally Siena March 4th and 5th, who's actually in like a postponement of their season because of some COVID testing. Spreading of that. So there's a lot going on. But I wanted to see in the postseason or the preseason poll, you did say around 13-7 was your prediction. What are your thoughts now that we're halfway through of where the women will end up at the end of this?
Well, Bridget, I really hope I'm not right with that prediction.
I hope so too.
If they finish 13-7, something's wrong. You know, I think that, like I said earlier, the gauntlet, they're through the gauntlet, and I hate to say it, and let me preface this by saying that Georgia said in one of the interviews I did with them a couple of days ago, you need to bring your A game every day or else you might lose. But the separation between Marist and those other teams like Quinnipiac and Fairfield and Manhattan and the rest of the teams in the MAC is pretty distinct. I really think, you know, that you're basically looking at 2 distinct tiers, those 4 and everyone else. I know that might not be the best thing to say, but I think that's what's happening, because these teams have some good players, but they're not deep. You know, they don't have players that are going to scare you at every position. If Marist loses, you know, any of these games coming in, it's because they didn't show up. That's why they're going to lose. And with a young team and an inexperienced team, a team that is still kind of learning as we go along, it might be bound to happen against a team like Iona or Siena. So I think they might drop another game or two coming in, but I can't see them going any worse than 16-4 and probably being a top 2 seed.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. I really don't feel like there will be any big competition until we get to the tournament. These next few teams in the conference season seem like we'll be able to go overtake them, but I agree with you also in saying that if they do lose, like, something happened, because I don't think there is any reason that they should lose, unless they're just like in their heads or they're just not all there, or playing down to another team's level, like we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
So it might happen. Might come close. We might have a couple more close end games situations.
And I think that would be good for them. Sorry to interrupt. Bridget.
No. Please go.
I think that, first, I don't think it's all going to be a cakewalk going in. I think that it'd be good if they got pushed by some of these teams, or if they, didn't play their best and they realized that you can't take these games for granted, because, we're saying that, and they are the favorites to win the rest of their games, but, it rarely happens like that in college basketball. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And nothing is ever guaranteed, especially in college basketball. We watched it happen when they played Niagara the first game. We kind of thought it was a lock, and then all of a sudden they're in overtime. It's a little crazy, but you just have to keep playing their game. They can't play down, especially going into their game against Rider, who is 2-10 in the conference. So, Jonathan, who has surprised you most in the conference this season besides Marist? Because I think Marist kind of surprised all of us. I don't think any of us really kind of expected them to go 10-2, especially after their record last year. But who has surprised you most so far?
So that's a great question, Makenzie. And I think there's probably 2 answers to this. One, a positive surprise. 2, a negative surprise. Starting with the positive surprise, I think it's the team Marist just played. I think Niagara, they got picked 10th in the preseason poll, and preseason polls are what they are. I picked them somewhere around that when I did the preview, and they're not a 10th place team. They play hard, and then on the negative side, I know I think they're 6-2, but I'm not really that impressed with Manhattan so far. They've kind of, I thought they might take bigger steps. I thought they were going to finish second this year, but I think Marist is better than they are. Quinnipiac they split with, but Quinnipiac probably could have won both those games. So I think they might be, a 3rd or 4th place team. I just don't think they're polished enough on offense to get things where they need to be right now. So I guess those are my 2 surprises. And Manhattan could totally prove me wrong and win the whole thing,
But I agree with you. When Marist played Manhattan, I thought the same thing. I was like, I don't really think this is the first place team, at least at that moment. Like you were saying, they could end up, changing their season completely. But I also agree with Niagara. Niagara played so well those 2 games. Even though they lost, they played so well. They were so solid. And their record, I believe, is only 1-3. So they've got a lot. They've got a lot of games to go where they can just turn it all around.
I think that's what's been so fun too about this 2020-21 season. It wouldn't be a 2020 season without a few surprises for sure. But that's what I think has been fun about this MAC conference like this year, because I think things that we expected didn't happen or are not happening, and I think that's one of the most fun things about sports, even though, like, obviously I hate losing my football playoff bracket, but I love a few surprises. Like I really do, and I think that's like one of the best things about sports is you never really truly know. And I think that this conference this year, it has really been interesting, and I think come the time for the tournament, I think a lot of it is going to be anybody's game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited.
And I also think, like Dave mentioned when we did the men's one, but he was like, something that's kind of good about the schedule, how they kind of play back-to-back games is, if you lose one game, you have the opportunity to kind of like study up on what you did in that game wrong and improve. And you can really kind of see that with Marist games, especially, their first games, they're a little closer, there's a little bit more mistakes, and then they just tighten it up and they're ready to go in the next game. And I think it's super exciting to see that, not only from Marist, but from a lot of teams in the league, because you can see like the wheels turning, you can see the improvements coming, and I just think it's just going to make the playoffs and, everybody's games down the line so much better.
Okay, Jonathan, just one more thing before you go. Do you think that the MAC will be able to finish this, given all the policies that are going into it surrounding the pandemic? And I know some teams are further behind than others in that aspect. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how Marist will fare with that, and also the MAC in general.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I'm pretty sure the MAC policy is 3 times a week. You have to, for testing, you have to fact check me on that, but there are teams all over the place in terms of games played. Marist has like 10. I think that might be the most or the second most. And then you have, on the other hand, Monmouth, who just played their first game yesterday, and now you're asking them to play 20 games in a month and a half, and odds are that's not going to happen. If one team, or if they get COVID, that just totally goes out the window. So it seems like Marist has a chance to get 20 games in, but that's probably not the case across the board. And I read this thing about the MAC's new tiebreaker policies, and if all teams don't get 20 wins in, they're just going to do the seeding for the tournaments by who has the most conference wins. And that could actually work in Marist's favor, since they have Fairfield is technically in the lead when it comes to winning percentage. They're 5-1, but Marist is 8-2. They have 4 more games played. So if Marist finishes with more wins than Fairfield, and everyone can't get their 20 games, and Marist is the 1 seed more than likely. In a league like the MAC, you need to have it because it's just a 1 bid. You just get the 1 bid to the tournament. So it needs to be fair, I think. I don't think you can exclude anyone from playing. So I think you're going to see them try to take every measure necessary to have the conference tournament, because, you could just say, look, there's 4 good teams, let's have them play. But is that fair to everyone? Absolutely not. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to learn a lot as we go along here.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to do their best. Now we're kind of even floating with, spring sports starting in March, and, maybe fall sports of soccer and volleyball. So it's kind of going to be a very busy spring semester in figuring all this out. But yeah, we're just kind of along for the ride. But Jonathan, thanks so much for coming on today. It really was so nice to have you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, I am honored that you guys invited me. I'm glad that coming on hypothetically is no longer hypothetical. It actually happened. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
Jonathan,
thanks so much.
Jonathan does a podcast on his own about women's basketball in the Fox Den, right?
Inside the Fox Den.
Inside the Fox Den.
You guys were one of my first guest appearances. And I appreciate it. You were definitely the highlight of that episode.
He posts it every week on the Centerfield website, so you should check out his podcast.
And we'll be seeing you sometime soon with more things on spring sports, and maybe even talking about our predictions on fall sports when they start up, to see if we are right. So we'll be back
eventually
at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 7's coming at some point. Don't worry about it.